So much has been said on Red Dead Redemption 1 that it's hard to find a unique angle on the game to talk about. The game has been praised to death on its characterization of John Marston, a reformed outlaw turned bounty hunter for the United States government and the world in which he inhabits. The game has garnered a legendary status amongst those who've had the pleasure of playing this game, and why shouldn't it? The game on almost every fundamental level is breathtaking. Sure, the graphics might be a bit outdated nowadays, but aside from that, this game is exceptionally good. The sound design and soundtrack are mesmerizing, and you feel every shot. You get sucked into this world full of scum, villainy, and unlikely heroes trying to help you on your quest. From preachers preaching outside of saloons to the sound of a grand piano playing ragtime as you push through the saloon doors onto creaky hardwood flooring, you order a shot of whiskey from the bar, to the patrons inside playing games and discussing the day's events. You get lost in the moment. And this is just one example of the countless times you'll get thrown into this world, and that's something special. Let's not forget the moments when the music kicks in throughout the game, whether it's when you're riding your horse and the right track just captures the mood of the moment, to when the electric guitar kicks in and you're taking on a gang hideout. The soundtrack never misses a beat, and that's something to commend this game on. Rockstar Games cooked with this game, and there's a reason that this game is still being discussed and played through all these years later. But why am I front loading the video with all of the technical aspects of the game? Well, hypothetical viewer, is because this isn't what this video is about, but I feel it important to touch on. Instead, this video is going to be going over the story for the most part of Red Dead Redemption and its ongoing themes and threads that can be found throughout. Red Dead Redemption 1 is not just about the redemption of John Marston and whether or not he can be redeemed for the sins of his past, but it's also about government corruption, the impeding nature of civilization on a savage land and the taming of its people, especially the Native Americans, the end of the Wild West and all of its hypocrisy, themes of change, advancement, family, manifest destiny, the loss of innocence, law and order, the cycle of violence, along with the following questions. What's the difference between a loving act and a hateful one? Do the ends ever justify the means? What does it mean to truly be redeemed? In this video, I'll be going over the major themes that I've noticed throughout Red Dead Redemption and picking apart key parts that relate to the questions and themes mentioned earlier. Whilst doing this, I came to the conclusion that the world of Red Dead Redemption is futile, and over the course of this video, I will be going over exactly why that is the case. This video is going to be a pretty long-winded and in-depth video. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, to let alone edit, so that's going to be fun for future me to deal with. However, this game has inspired me, and I want to get back into my hobbies with editing videos and making videos and so on. On top of this, I feel like this goes without saying, this video will be going over a lot of spoilers for the game, so a spoiler warning is in effect. So if you'll indulge me, this is my critique and breakdown of Red Dead Redemption 1 15 years later and the futility of its world. When we start our adventure into Red Dead Redemption 1, one of the first things we'll start to notice that this is a period of great change, and we are immensely out of place. As we get off the boat, we see one of the first motor cars being transported. The age of the machine has reached the Wild West. The streets are cobbled, businesses are booming. The music here really sells the idea that this is a very melancholic moment. We're getting the briefest of tastes on what to come on the horizon. Manifest destiny is in full effect, and we're witnessing it firsthand. We are the remnants of a dying time. We are an outlaw. No, we are an old outlaw, now bounty hunter, being forced to take down our brothers in arms so that we can return to the life we once had. We don't look like everyone else here on the boat or around Blackwater. Everyone is wearing smart clothes, fresh suits, jewelry, ornate garments. John is wearing dirty and battered clothing, a denim vest and a worn out hat. The men with us are the FBI, an agency which is being hired by the would-be Governor Nate Johns as a way to clean up the state and secure himself a position in government. Their way of going about this is quite simple. Use an already existing outlaw to do their dirty work. If John succeeds, they'll get to have all the glory, all the commendations and the credit. John gets to return to his life that he had, and he would be redeemed in the eyes of the United States government. If John fails, well, it's not their fault and they can wipe their hands of another criminal. It just means they'll need to get someone else to do it for them. Another reason for them using John is because if they were to kill Bill Williamson, Javier and Dutch van der Linde, then they run the risk of making them martyrs and having an even bigger crime surge than they already have. But if John does it, then that won't happen because to others, it's just another criminal taking out another criminal. How they're going about this is uniquely twisted due to the fact that in order to get John to comply with their demands, they kidnap John's wife Abigail and their son Jack Marston and keep them in a secure location, only to be released once the work's been done and all 3 members of the old gang are taken out. However, as of the beginning of the story, only 2 of the gang members are running around, considering everyone including the law is under the assumption that Dutch van der Linde is dead after a botched robbery a few years prior, which can be read in one of the first newspapers we can purchase in-game. Already the game is making us ask the question on whether the ends justify futile means. The government is supposed to be the good guys, yet they're openly kidnapping a man's family. Is this truly the future for the American people? Is this what it means to be a civilized country? As we board the train bound for Armadillo, we can hear a few conversations going on. One conversation is going on between two elderly ladies talking about how they've brought civilization to this savage land, and that while the native population may have it bad and they've lost their land and gone through unspeakable horrors, on the plus side they believe they have in fact helped the natives, that they've gained access to heaven. This entertains the phrase manifest destiny, which is the idea that white Americans were divinely ordained to settle the entire continent of North America. This idea spawned a number of different measures designed to remove or destroy the Native American population. The other conversation we can overhear is between a priest and one of his congregation, a woman called Jenny. She talks about the technological advancement of the modern age and how they've made machines that can make a man fly, with the priest disregarding, saying only angels can fly. He talks about how there's a distinction that must be made between an innocent and a savage when it comes to the question on whether an innocent who doesn't receive communion will automatically go to hell, which seems unfair in Jenny's eyes. This talking point referring to the native population and how they were considered savages because they did not live the way that Western civilization thought they should live, that they aren't innocent in the eyes of the Lord. Jenny is blinded by her faith and she is eating up everything that the priest says, that they're here to spread the word of God and civilization, which to them is the same thing, further emphasizing manifest destiny rhetoric. As well as this, Jenny asks an important question to the priest. What is the difference between a loving act and a hateful one? How does one make that distinction? This whole conversation that's going on has a few interpretations. The first interpretation that can be of this is that this is a reflection on John Marston as a character. Throughout the game, he makes the distinction between being an innocent and a savage. He may have lost his home, his livelihood, but he's gained access to heaven. In his final moments when he's defending his family, can that be a loving act and a hateful one at the same time? Killing while defending those you love? Is John Marston a bad man? Does he deserve redemption? Does he deserve peace in heaven after all he's done? This question can be further explored more with the honor mechanic within the game, as these sorts of questions are many shades of grey as opposed to the black and white thinking of the time. Savage also being applied to the many outlaws and criminals that roam the Wild West. Civilization is coming in, grasping the West in a chokehold, ready to stamp out and make the West conform to its ideals. The age of the outlaw is over and you cannot stop it. For lack of a better term, you, along with all the other outlaws, are on borrowed time. On top of all this, it can apply to his mission. He needs to bring about law and order by doing the very things that make him, in the eyes of civilization, a savage. He needs to kill, hunt down those he called friend in some of the most violent of ways in order to bring about peace and civilization to the frontier. Yet another interpretation can be the critique on civilization as a whole. The two old ladies on the train, being classist and bigoted, point out that civilization isn't at all civil as it likes to make itself to be. On top of this, the priest talks about how the word of God and civilization is a gift, yet this gift was forced upon the natives with a sword and gun. Not very civil. To civilization, they were the innocents and the natives were savages, yet when you see what civilization did in order to bring about these gifts, you can see it being flipped. Civilization being the ones who will happily kidnap a family to make him obey, the very government being savage to make ends meet. Even at the end of the game, after all you've done for them proves that anybody can become a savage, and this is further emphasized with the final Strangers and Freaks mission called Remember My Family, which I'll go into more depth later. Throughout the game, we're shown in a multitude of ways that despite civilization being this golden child of progress, we're treated with nothing but double standards, ineptitudes, and the lines getting more blurred as time goes on. One such example of this can be found when helping the local marshal of Armadillo. We gain more insight into themes of the government imposing on people, the dire state of law enforcement, and the criminal element. Bill Williamson is outside of his jurisdiction over in the next county, and he has too many problems of his own to worry about, such as the railroad company. The very people who pay his wage are burning down settlements in order to make way for the railway and trying to make him turn a blind eye. This alone shows that the very people who claim to be bringing civilization to this savage land in their eyes is no better than the bandits and outlaws already living there. By burning down the settlements, they become the criminal element, and they get away with it too because they're bringing about order and ease of access with the train lines. In another mission with the marshal, we are helping him deal with members of Bill Williamson's gang who are going about pillaging and performing horrific acts on the local population. The victims and survivors of these attacks call out the marshal and his deputies and how much he's failing the people. The fact these acts go on because Bill Williamson is outside his jurisdiction and he's focused too much on the red tape of the bureaucrats causes innocent people to suffer whilst the corrupt politicians and businessmen prosper. He might not like that this is going on, we learn that this firsthand from him, but this is the reality. As Miss McFarlane says early on in the game, businessmen are the new cowboys. That's where all the money is, that's where all the freedom is, that's the modern day outlaw. Another example of the futility of Red Dead Redemption's world comes within the second act of the game. After we assault Fort Mercer in the hopes of finding Bill Williamson, only for him to not be there, we end up making our way across the border into Mexico. Mexico during this point of the game is going through a bit of a revolutionary war between two factions. On one hand you have the local government, which is obeying the president of Mexico as a whole, and you have the rebels led by Abraham Reyes. The government is corrupt to the very core and there's no merits to supporting them whatsoever, but we do so anyway in the hopes of finding Bill Williamson and Javier Escuela. This leads us to ask the question, do the ends justify the means? And we'll go over that now. The government is corrupt. The leader of the local government, Colonel Allende, is a man who looks down upon the people, the rebels and all those under his command. He's known to be a serial defiler of women, often leading the government to capture any women they find and bring them to him so he can have a taste before the Mexican army can have them. It doesn't matter if they're associated with the rebels or not. If they're found, they're taken under the guise of recruitment. As well as this, he has no problem with keeping the people in line using barbaric methods. One such method ordered by Allende was to firebomb the houses of the rebels and innocent civilians so that they had no homes to come back to. Throughout the game we can see in random encounters that the Mexican government is holding firing squads and killing anybody who is suspected of being a rebel. During one of the missions for Luisa, we have to escort her sister to the dock so that she'll be safe from the army and Allende. During the entire mission we can see military checkpoints, firing squads, and all manner of means to ensure that nobody can escape and that Allende can have his women. Despite knowing all of this, seeing all of the crimes that are being committed, John Marston goes along and helps them out anyway under the pretext that they help him locate the men he's after. It's not until after we've been betrayed by them that we learn that they were already under the Colonel's protection, with Javier being a personal hitman for him. It's moments like this, after seeing all the destruction, violence and abuse, that we have to ask, is John Marston a good man for allowing these things to happen? As Landon Ricketts tells John, sitting by on the fence doing nothing is just as good as picking a side. And was everything that he'd done for the government worth it just to find the two men and ensure his family's freedom? What's the difference between a loving act and a hateful one? Not only that, but we have to ask, how can civilization with all of its virtues be just as violent as depraved as the outlaw scene back out west in America? Civilization hardly seems civilized if this is how they go about trying to win a war and bring peace, justice, freedom and security to the region. We also do some work with Luisa, who is infatuated with Abraham Reyes, believing that she is his wife to be and will do anything for the success of this war. On the one hand, this seems simple enough, albeit very tragic considering what ends up happening to her and her family. She dies. Her family gets killed and displaced. She gets forgotten by the man who claims to love her, and everything she had done had been in vain, for they replaced one villain with another. Once this is over, we end up helping the rebels some more, and we come to learn about Abraham Reyes. Abraham Reyes is a revolutionary leader and is aiming to bring prosperity and freedom to the people of Mexico. Despite this, however, we can learn that he's a racist against the Chinese, calling them an inferior race, despite moments before calling out the racism aimed towards the Mexican people. He claims to want to help people but thinks only on fucking women and making grand speeches and having his own palace. Luisa, his peasant girl wife-to-be, is forgettable to him, stating that someone from his class could never marry a peasant girl, and that he would need an upper-class wife if he is to be a leader. He also talks down about the peasants and talks openly about breeding with all of the girls he's been with so that Mexico can have more upper-class blood running through the country's veins. If all of this wasn't damning to his character, we learn that after the events of the Mexican chapter, he has become just as tyrannical as Colonel Allende in creating firing squads, killing protesters, and doing anything he can to claim more and more power. In the end, despite everything we did, everything that was fought and died for, it was all for nothing. We swapped one tyrant with another, but for John Marston, he doesn't care too much. For him, this isn't his problem, despite having direct implications towards most of the crimes being committed and the overall outcome of the war. To him, he only wants Williamson and Escuela. Everything else is just a means to an end. So I ask you, what was the point of everything? What was the point of the war when nothing changed? It was all futile. The only good thing about this whole endeavor was that we managed to claim Williamson and Escuela for the FBI. During this section of the game, we gain more evidence and examples of the themes we touched upon in part 1. At this point of the story, John has successfully taken in Bill Williamson and Javier Escuela and has been sent back to Blackwater in the hopes of hunting Dutch Vanderland, the last remaining member of John's old gang. John is under the assumption that his obligations have been met due to him bringing in his old friends. However, the United States government says otherwise, even saying that John is in no position to be making demands and that this is done when they say they're done. Something interesting within this section of the game is from the character of Edgar to Ross. During the first conversation when we arrive in Blackwater, we learn that they now know where Dutch is and that they want him to be the one to kill him, but they don't want to create a martyr out of him. Because at the end of the game, when at Beach's Hope, the US Army descends down along with the US government in order to wipe out John Marston, the last remnant of the Van der Linde gang. Because it was Ross and the army taking John out for reasons we don't fully know for certain, he made John Marston a martyr in his final moments and caused Jack to set out for revenge a couple of years later, but I'll touch on this more later on. This arc of the game touches on a few themes: the consequences of Manifest Destiny, the contradictions within civilization, and Dutch Van der Linde. With Manifest Destiny, we can see this through the plight of the natives, with their land being taken away from them by force, forced education, and unspeakable horrors being committed to them. It's no wonder that they'd become outcasts and join up with Dutch. Dutch, with his silver tongue, being able to convince them to join up with him and take on their oppressors. And why wouldn't they? They've already lost so much. When we finally meet Dutch, he's unhinged and feral. He's no longer the man he was back in the good old days. He's embraced the chaos and now easily kills hostages without too much for care. He's happy to bring up John's past and flaunt that he and the other members of the gang used to sleep around with his wife Abigail as a way to provoke a response from John. During a mission when we help Nastas, a native informant who's helping him find Dutch, we discover his base of operations and aim to see what we can find. Whilst doing this, we pick up some binoculars and see Dutch, only for him to shoot and knock John unconscious. What's interesting here is why he aimed for the binoculars and not anywhere else. Why did Dutch spare John like this? Why not kill us and be done with it? I believe it's because Dutch still loves John in some way, the same way that John still loves Dutch despite everything. Whilst they do fight and end up in a few battles, there's usually some hesitation, especially from John. If he had a choice, he'd rather kill Edgar Ross 100 times over than Dutch, but the only reason he's doing this is for his family. If we look at this whole thing in a similar light, we can see that the only reason that the natives are siding with Dutch is because of their family, because they've lost their land, their freedoms, their homes, their families, all under the guise of taming the West and bringing civilization to a savage land. Yet their means of going about this completely undermines the idea of civilization being anything but civil. They were civil. Would civilization commit unspeakable horrors? Would something so civil force their religion, their ideas on what's right and wrong, what's civil and what's savage onto others just because it's different and they don't understand it? It's all of these points which Dutch uses to radicalize the natives because this is all they have left, a last stand. To them, they're the good guys and it's the government and all of the new ideas of civilization being the villains. When Edgar Ross talks about how without law and order it's one man and his gun versus another man and his gun disagreeing over flowers, does point out how hypocritical and contradictory the idea is. They're the good guys, but they're also the bad guys. Nothing that they're doing, how they're going about it is perfect, but to them the alternative is hell. But as we see throughout the game, it's not working. If anything, they're the new outlaws. Government and businesses have all the money, all the power, and without the consequences. The law out west are struggling to deal with crime because big business and industries are committing crimes and bribing them in order to bring about civilization. Once the law wants to do something, they'll do it. It doesn't really matter. Want to kidnap a man's wife and son and hold them ransom? You can do that once you work with the government, no questions asked, just like an outlaw would do. So we end up meeting Dutch at the end of this act, and this conversation is one of the greatest in the game. He talks about his nature, how he can't fight his own nature and you can't fight change. He touches on the truth that when he's gone, they'll just find another monster in order to justify their wages, to which John says that's their business. And he's not wrong, because that's exactly what they do. They're not men of their word. Sure, they let John go and return to his family, but it was short-lived and all for nothing. In the end, it was all for nothing. Everything John did for the government was futile, except he did find his redemption. In those final moments, whilst he's escorting his wife and son to the stables and sending them away from the slaughter, he sacrifices himself so that they have enough time to escape, and so that the law won't come after his family ever again. In those few moments when he opens the barn door and faces the firing squad, in that moment, he earned his redemption, a selfless, loving act. As we finish what seems to be the final mission of Red Dead Redemption, we jump ahead a few more years. The year is 1914. The First World War is on the horizon and Jack Marston is now a man, donning his father's gun belt and hat. What was originally John and Uncle's graves, now his mother and John's wife Abigail has joined them in death. We don't know how she died, but that leaves Jack Marston not only the last remaining member of the Marston family, but also the last remaining member of the Van der Linde gang. And it's in these next precious moments in which everything comes crashing crumbling down and really hammers home the futile nature of the game. We end the game doing one last mission, a stranger mission titled Remember My Family, in which Jack Marston is now going around various settlements trying to locate the man who kidnapped John's family and made John do the government's dirty work, along with being the man who organised his family's death, Edgar Ross, leader of the FBI. We eventually find Edgar Ross and challenge him to a shootout. One last final duel, fueled by bloodlust and a taste of revenge for his family. But in a splinter of a second, we dump a whole magazine of bullets into him and watch as his body crumbles to the floor and gets carried downstream. Jack looks at his gun, the weight of his actions weighing heavy on his mind. He has become the very thing John and Abigail never wanted for him. He's become an outlaw. He's become a murderer. He's become exactly like John, and in that moment, his future remains uncertain, his fate to never be known. And in this quest to avenge his family, John's death was ultimately in vain. As John says at the beginning of the game to Bonnie, people don't forget, nothing gets forgiven. In the end, because of Edgar Ross and his hubris, he ended up creating his own downfall. He turned John into a martyr and signed his own death warrant. Did John deserve peace in the end? Did he deserve to live the happy farmer life given all of the sins of his past? Was he a good man? Could the outcome have been avoided if somebody else had killed John and not the US Army and the FBI? In the end, we leave the story on a very bittersweet note. Despite how much progress seems to be made, there is no end to the savagery of the Wild West. There is no end to the Wild West. The names may be different, it might not be outlaws and cowboys, but business and industry. For all the perks of civilization, it is anything but civilized. This then brings about some interesting questions about Jack. Was this quest that he went on to hunt Edgar Ross a loving act to avenge his family, or a hateful one fueled by revenge? After all, when Jack actually confronts him, he says that he saw them kill John when that's simply not true. He saw the men coming after him, but he never saw them kill him. Even the way Jack talks during this, it sounds like a teenager arguing his case to try and justify his actions. Was his actions justified? Did he fully understand the consequences of his actions? In the end, I think he does by how he looks at the gun. It's nothing like his stories. It's not dramatic. A man's dead and he'll no doubt be on the run the rest of his life just as his father was. Was it really worth it? Was this a loving act or a hateful one? Did the ends truly justify the means? What's the difference between an innocent and a savage?